The Montana dust storm had been raging for 2 days when Sarah Moreland finally stumbled into the small town of Copper Ridge, more dead than alive. Her wedding dress, once pristine white silk imported all the way from Boston, now hung in tatters around her bleeding feet. She'd run for 3 days straight, sleeping in abandoned barns, drinking from creek beds, anything to escape the fate her father had sold her into for the price of cleared gambling debts. Marcus Thorne, the man she was meant to marry in 2 days' time, wasn't just cruel. He was a monster who'd already buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances. Sarah had overheard the cook whispering about bruises hidden beneath high collars, about screams in the night that servants learned to ignore. When her father dismissed her fears with a backhanded slap, Sarah knew she had only one choice: run or die. Before we continue with Sarah's desperate journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Thank you so much. Now, let's return to Sarah's story. Now, standing in front of the general store, Sarah pulled off her mother's ruby ring, the only thing of value she had left in this world. Her hands trembled as she held it up to the shopkeeper, a portly man with suspicious eyes. The shopkeeper examined the ring, his eyes gleaming with greed. "This might get you a loaf of stale bread and a canteen of water. Take it or leave it." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. That ring was her last connection to her mother, who died bringing her into this harsh world. But what good were memories when your stomach was eating itself? "I'll take." "Hold on." A deep voice cut through the air like a knife through butter. Sarah turned to see a man stepping out of the afternoon shadows. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His sun-darkened skin spoke of years working under the merciless western sky. And his eyes were the color of storm clouds, intense and unwavering. A scar ran along his jawline, white against his tan skin. He wore simple clothes, a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt, dust-covered pants, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles. "That ruby's worth $50 at least, Hutchins," the man said, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "You trying to rob this lady blind?" the shopkeeper sputtered. "Now, Mr. Garrett, You were just about to give her fair value, weren't you?" The stranger, Garrett, stepped closer, and something in his presence made the shopkeeper shrink back. Full provisions, a month's worth, and throw in a proper dress and boots. "But the ring! Keep your store, Hutchins." Garrett pulled out a worn leather wallet. "Put it on my account." Sarah found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. I can't accept charity." For the first time, Garrett's stern expression softened slightly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. His eyes held no pity, no judgment, only a deep, weary understanding that seemed to reach into her very soul. "Gold isn't what's needed here," he said quietly. "You are." Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "My ranch, the Broken Creek. I've got 3,000 acres and exactly 0 people to help run it since my hands all left for the California gold rush last month." He gestured to her tattered dress, her bleeding feet. "You look like someone running from something bad." "I'm someone who needs reliable help. Seems like we might be able to help each other." I'm not." She pressed for him. She curled her hands, tears flowing deep into her eyes. For the first time, Garrett's stern expression softened slightly. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. His eyes held no pity, no judgment, only a deep, weary understanding that seemed to reach into her. Sarah struggled to form words. Her mind screamed that this was too good to be true, that men didn't offer help without expecting payment of the worst kind. Garrett seemed to read her thoughts. His expression hardened again, but not with anger, with something like old pain. "I've got a spare room in the ranch house. You keep it. Door locks from the inside. You work the ranch, cooking, mending, helping with the horses, and you get room, board, and wages. $30 a month. When you've saved enough to go wherever you're heading, you go. No questions asked, no strings attached. Why would you? Because 5 years ago, my sister ran from a man who liked to use his fists more than his words." Garrett's jaw tightened, that scar seeming to stand out more prominently. "She didn't make it far enough. I swore then I'd never let another woman face that alone if I had the power to help." He extended his hand, calloused and strong. "Do we have a deal, miss?" "Moreland, Sarah Moreland." She stared at his outstretched hand, her last defenses crumbling. Everything in his eyes told her he meant every word. Slowly, carefully, she placed her small hand in his much larger one. His grip was firm but gentle, warm despite the calluses. "James Garrett, but everyone calls me Garrett." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, at the jolt of electricity that seemed to pass between them at that touch. He released her hand quickly, almost too quickly. "Let's get you those supplies." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in the back of Garrett's wagon, dressed in a simple but clean calico dress and her first pair of boots that actually fit. Her stomach was full of fresh bread and cheese, and a canteen of cool water sat beside her. She watched Garrett's broad back as he guided the horses down the dusty road, his hands steady on the reins. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. "About an hour's ride. We'll get there before sunset." He glanced back at her, and in the golden light of late afternoon, his eyes seemed almost silver. "You'll have your own space. No one will bother you there." "You live alone?" "Mostly. Got a foreman, old Pete, who stays in the bunkhouse. He's 65 and ornery as a rattlesnake, but he's good people. Keeps to himself." Garrett paused, then added quietly, "You're safe at Broken Creek, Sarah. I give you my word on that." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way he said it, with such careful respect, made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Why is it called Broken Creek?" A shadow passed over his face. "The creek that runs through the property splits in two around a big rock formation. Looks like it's broken in half." He was quiet for a moment. Also felt appropriate. "Bought the place after my wife died. Seemed like everything was broken back then." Sarah's breath caught. "I'm sorry. 3 years ago, cholera outbreak." His hands tightened on the reins. "Lost her and our unborn child in the same week." "That's terrible." It was. He didn't elaborate, and Sarah didn't push. She understood loss, understood grief. Sometimes words only cheapened the weight of it. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape gradually shifting from dusty plains to rolling hills dotted with sage and wildflowers. The air smelled of earth and grass and something clean that Sarah couldn't quite name. It felt like breathing for the first time in months. "Can I ask what you were running from?" Garrett's voice was gentle, non-demanding. Sarah considered lying, then decided this man deserved the truth. An arranged marriage. My father sold me to clear his debts. The man? He's killed before. His wives. Does he know where you've gone? I don't think so. I ran at night, took back roads, avoided the main trails. She wrapped her arms around herself. But Marcus Thorne is a determined man, and rich. He might hire people to look. Then we'll need to be ready if he comes. Garrett's voice had gone cold, deadly. You're under my protection now. That means something in these parts. The words should have scared her, this acknowledgement that danger might follow. But instead, Sarah felt the first stirring of hope she'd experienced in months. This stranger, this hard man with gentle eyes, had just declared himself her shield. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the Broken Creek Ranch came into view. It was more beautiful than Sarah had imagined. A sturdy two-story house built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Behind it she could see a barn, a corral with several horses, and the creek Garrett had mentioned, its water catching the last rays of sunlight like liquid gold. Home, Garrett said simply, bringing the wagon to a stop. An old man emerged from the barn, bow-legged and weathered like ancient leather. His eyes, sharp despite his age, took in Sarah with one quick glance. Found yourself some help, did you? Old Pete's voice was gravelly, but not unkind. This is Miss Moreland. She'll be working the house and helping where needed. Garrett jumped down from the wagon with easy grace, then turned to help Sarah down. His hands on her waist were impersonal but careful, and he set her down as if she were made of glass. Sarah, this is Pete. He's been with the ranch since before I bought it. Ma'am? Pete tipped his hat. Welcome to Broken Creek. Thank you, Sarah managed, overwhelmed by the simple courtesy. I'll show you to your room, Garrett said, grabbing her small bundle of supplies. Pete, can you handle the horses? Course I can. I ain't dead yet. The inside of the house was simple but well-maintained. The main floor held a large kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a sitting room with a fireplace, and what looked like an office. Garrett led her upstairs, where a hallway connected 4 doors. This was meant to be... He paused at the second door, his hand on the knob. This was going to be the nursery. Sarah's heart clenched at the grief in those words. He pushed open the door to reveal a beautiful room with windows facing east. A large bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. It was more than she'd had in years. Locks here. Garrett pointed to the sturdy bolt on the inside of the door. My room's at the end of the hall. Pete's in the bunkhouse. You need anything, day or night, you call out. He set down her bundle and turned to leave, then stopped. Sarah? Yes? You're not property here. You're a person who deserves respect and safety. His storm-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. I hope you'll come to believe that. Before she could respond, he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Sarah sat on the bed, her bed, and for the first time since her mother's death 5 years ago, she let herself cry. But these weren't tears of fear or despair. These were tears of relief, of hope, of the overwhelming sensation of being seen as human after so long being treated as a commodity. Outside her window, she could hear Garrett talking to the horses in that low, gentle voice. She heard him laugh at something Pete said, a rich sound that seemed rusty from disuse. Sarah pressed her hand against the window glass, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere out there, Marcus Thorne might be looking for her. Somewhere behind her lay a father who'd valued whiskey and cards more than his own daughter. But here, in this room that smelled of sage and summer wind, with a door that locked from the inside and a man downstairs who'd sworn to protect her. Sarah Moreland allowed herself to imagine something she'd thought impossible: a future. The days fell into a rhythm that Sarah found both comforting and strange. She rose before dawn to start the stove and prepare breakfast. Simple fare of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that Garrett ate with grateful efficiency before heading out to work the ranch. He'd return at noon, dusty and sweating, for a quick lunch, then disappear again until sunset. At first, they barely spoke beyond pleasantries, but Sarah noticed things. The way Garrett always took off his hat when entering the house, how he washed at the pump outside before coming in, not wanting to track mud across her clean floors. The careful distance he maintained, never standing too close, never touching her unless absolutely necessary. He was a man trying very hard not to frighten her. And somehow, that consideration touched her more deeply than any pretty words could have. By the end of her first week, Sarah had learned the rhythms of the ranch. She discovered that Garrett took his coffee black and strong, that he had a terrible habit of skipping meals when deep in work, that he sometimes sat on the porch. She learned that old Pete had a sweetheart in town, a widow named Martha who sent him apple pies that made him blush like a schoolboy. She learned which horses were gentle enough for a beginner to approach, and which ones, like Garrett's stallion Thunder, required experienced hands. On her 8th day at Broken Creek, Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the corral. She rushed over to find Garrett on the ground, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, while Thunder pranced nervously nearby. "Garrett!" She was through the fence before she could think, kneeling beside him. "I'm all right," he groaned, trying to sit up. "Damn horse spooked at a rattler. Threw me right into the fence post." "You're bleeding." Sarah pressed her apron against the wound. "We need to get you inside." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Her voice came out sharper than intended. "Can you stand?" With her help and Pete's, they got Garrett into the house and seated at the kitchen table. Sarah gathered clean cloths, water, and the medical supplies she'd found in the pantry. "This is going to hurt," she warned, cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Garrett sucked in a breath, but didn't pull away. This close, Sarah could see the different shades of gray in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched against the pain, the small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of another old injury. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "My mother was often sick. I learned to tend wounds and illness." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she applied salve. "Hold still. I need to stitch this closed." "You know how to stitch?" "I'm better with flesh than fabric, ironically." She threaded the needle, then met his eyes. "This part will really hurt. Do you want whiskey?" "I'm fine." But his hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Sarah worked as quickly and carefully as she could, aware of every time his breath hitched, every slight tensing of his muscles. When she finally tied off the last stitch, she found his eyes were closed, his face pale. "Done," she whispered. Garrett's eyes opened slowly. In them, Sarah saw pain, yes, but also something else, a vulnerability that made her own breath catch. "Thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Sarah found herself unable to look away. "You gave me safety. The least I can do is return the favor." Something shifted between them in that moment. The careful distance they'd both maintained began to crack, just slightly. Garrett raised his hand as if to touch her face, then seemed to catch himself. His hand fell back to his lap. "I should rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You should." But neither of them moved. It was Pete's voice from the doorway that broke the spell. "Boss, got a fence down in the north pasture." 3 cows wandered off. Garrett stood, swaying slightly. Sarah caught his arm. "You're not going anywhere with a head injury." "The cows." "I'll handle the cows," Pete interrupted. "You listen to Miss Sarah. Woman's got more sense than both of us combined." After Pete left, Sarah guided Garrett to the sitting room couch. "Lie down. I'll check on you every hour." "Sarah." "That's an order, Mr. Garrett." She softened her tone. "Please." He relented, stretching out on the couch with a grimace. Sarah covered him with a blanket, and before she could step away, his hand caught hers. "Sarah." His eyes were serious, intense. "I meant what I said that first day. You're safe here, always." Her throat tightened. "I'm starting to believe that." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Such a small touch, but it sent electricity racing up her arm. Then he released her, closing his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured, "for everything." Sarah watched him for a moment longer, her heart doing strange things in her chest. Then she retreated to the kitchen, pressing her hands against her flushed cheeks. What was happening to her? She'd sworn never to trust a man again, never to let her guard down. Yet here she was, her pulse racing from a simple touch, caring far too much about whether Garrett was truly all right. It was dangerous, these feelings. Dangerous and terrifying, and absolutely inevitable. That night, Sarah woke to the sound of Garrett moving around downstairs. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with his head in his hands. "Garrett?" She kept her voice soft. "Are you all right?" He looked up, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see the pain in his eyes. Not physical this time, but something deeper. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Head's pounding." "Let me make you something." She moved to the stove, heating water for willow bark tea. As it steeped, she sat across from him. "Does this happen often? The sleeplessness?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Since Caroline died, some nights are worse than others." "Tell me about her." Sarah surprised herself with the request. "If you want to." Garrett's expression softened with memory. "She was sunshine. That's the only way I can describe her. Always laughing, always seeing the best in people." He traced a pattern on the table. "We met when I was working as a ranch hand for her father. He didn't approve. I had nothing but debts and dreams. But Caroline didn't care. She said she'd rather be poor with me than rich without me." Sarah poured the tea, set it in front of him. "She sounds wonderful." She was. He took a sip, wincing at the bitterness. "When she got sick, she made me promise not to lock myself away after she was gone. Made me swear I'd keep living, keep hoping." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I haven't been very good at keeping that promise." Without thinking, Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Maybe it's time to start." Garrett stared at their joined hands, something like wonder crossing his face. "Maybe it is." They sat like that for a long time, hands touching, silence comfortable between them. Outside, the night wind whispered through the sage, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. Inside the kitchen of Broken Creek Ranch, 2 broken people found the first fragile threads of connection. When Sarah finally returned to her room, she lay awake, her hands still tingling from where it had touched his. She was in trouble, she realized. Deep, terrifying, wonderful trouble. Because despite every vow she'd made to herself, despite every wall she'd built around her heart, Sarah Moreland was falling for James Garrett. And God help her, she didn't want to stop. The following weeks brought a shift in their dynamic. Garrett began teaching Sarah to ride, starting with a gentle mare named Honey. At first, Sarah was terrified, certain she'd fall and break her neck. But Garrett's patient instructions and steady presence gradually eased her fears. "You're doing perfect." His hand rested on her knee, a casual touch meant to steady her, but it burned through her skirt. "Trust the horse. She knows what she's doing." By the third lesson, Sarah was trotting around the corral without assistance. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating. The wind in her hair, the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the wide-open sky above. Garrett watched from the fence, a smile on his face that made him look years younger. "You're going to put me out of a job at this rate. Don't be ridiculous." Sarah brought Honey to a stop beside him, flushed with exertion and pride. "I still can't lasso, shoot, or mend a fence. Yet." His eyes held hers. "But I could teach you, if you want." "I want." The words hung between them, meaning more than just riding lessons. Garrett's expression grew serious, searching. Then he reached up and helped her down from the saddle, his hands on her waist firm and sure. For a moment, they stood chest to chest, close enough that Sarah could see the pulse beating in his throat, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His hands remained on her waist, and hers had somehow ended up on his shoulders. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice rough. "I shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" "Feel this way." His thumbs moved in small circles against her sides, unconscious but devastating. "You came here for safety, not this. And if I want this?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Garrett's eyes darkened. "Do you? Or is this gratitude talking?" Sarah considered the question seriously, because she knew he deserved an honest answer. "When you first brought me here, maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was relief at finding someone kind in a cruel world." She lifted one hand to trace the scar on his jaw, feeling him shudder at her touch. "But now it's because you make me laugh. Because you're patient and gentle and strong. Because you see me as a person, not a possession. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel broken anymore." "Sarah," his voice was strangled, "I know you loved Caroline. I would never ask you to forget her or replace her." Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. "But Garrett, maybe we could both keep our promises to keep living, to keep hoping, together." He stared at her as if she were something precious and fragile. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. It was the gentlest kiss Sarah had ever experienced. No demands, no force, just soft pressure and infinite tenderness. His lips moved against hers like a question, and she answered by sliding her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. Garrett groaned softly and deepened the kiss, one hand moving to cup her face while the other tightened on her waist. Sarah felt herself melting into him, all the fear and tension of the past months draining away, replaced by this bright, burning warmth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me if I'm moving too fast. Tell me if you need me to slow down." "You're perfect," Sarah whispered. "Just be patient with me. I'm not used to being treated right." His jaw clenched. "I'll die before I hurt you, Sarah. That's a promise. I believe you." They stood wrapped in each other's arms until old Pete's deliberately loud cough from the barn doorway made them spring apart. "Hate to interrupt," Pete called, not sounding sorry at all. "But we got visitors coming up the drive." 3 men on horseback. Garrett's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His body went taut, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Go inside, Sarah. Now." "But, please." His eyes met hers, full of protective intensity. "Stay in the house until I know who they are." Sarah hurried to the house, her heart pounding. From the window, she watched Garrett and Pete stand side by side as 3 riders approached. Even from a distance, she could see these weren't friendly visitors. They sat their horses with the lazy confidence of men who'd never been challenged. Then the lead rider removed his hat, and Sarah's blood turned to ice. Marcus Thorne had found her. He was exactly as she remembered, handsome, in a cold, calculated way, with pale blue eyes that never held any real warmth. He wore expensive clothes and a gun belt that gleamed with silver inlay. A man who needed everyone to know he had money and power. Sarah couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw Garrett's body language shift into something dangerous. Saw Pete's hand hover near his rifle. Saw Marcus gesture toward the house with an arrogant smile. Then Garrett stepped forward, and even from this distance, Sarah could sense the threat in that movement. The conversation lasted several more minutes, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Marcus and his men turned their horses and rode away. But not before Marcus shot one last look at the house. A look that promised this wasn't over. Sarah was trembling when Garrett entered the house. His face like carved granite. "He knows I'm here." It wasn't a question. Yes. Garrett's hands were fisted at his sides. "He said you're his betrothed, that your father had every legal right to arrange the marriage, that he's come to collect what's rightfully his." "What did you tell him?" Garrett's eyes met hers, blazing with barely controlled fury. "I told him you're under my protection, that you're employed at this ranch and have every right to refuse a marriage, that if he or his men set one foot on my property again, I'll shoot them for trespassing. He won't give up." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "You don't know Marcus. He always gets what he wants." "Not this time." Garrett crossed the room, taking her gently by the shoulders. "Sarah, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I told you that first day, you're safe here. I meant it. Thorne can bring the whole damn territory if he wants. He's not taking you anywhere." His voice dropped lower. "Not unless you want to go." "I don't." The words came without hesitation. "I don't ever want to leave." Something fierce and possessive flashed in Garrett's expression. "Then you won't. He'll come back with the law. He'll say I'm his legal property." "You're not property. You're a person." Garrett cupped her face in his hands. "And I know the sheriff. John Davies is a good man. He won't force a woman into marriage against her will, no matter what papers Thorne waves around." "You can't know that." "I do know it, because tomorrow we're riding into town and making it official that you work here. We'll file paperwork, get witness statements. We'll make sure there's legal proof that you chose this life freely." His thumbs stroked her cheeks. "And if that's not enough, if Thorne somehow finds a way to use the law against you, then what?" Garrett's smile was grim. "Then we'll have a different kind of conversation. But it won't come to that. I promise you." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to have his certainty, his confidence. But she knew Marcus Thorne in ways Garrett didn't, knew that he was vindictive and cruel, and not above hiring men who'd shoot first and ask questions later. That night, Sarah lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling. She heard Garrett pacing in his room, heard Pete moving around the bunkhouse, heard the normal night sounds of horses and cattle and wind. But she also heard something else, the faint jingle of spurs, the creak of leather, sounds that didn't belong to anyone who lived on this ranch. Sarah rose and moved to the window, her heart pounding. In the moonlight, she could just make out 3 figures on horseback, watching the house from the ridge above the property. Even from this distance, she recognized the set of Marcus's shoulders. He was staking out the ranch, waiting for an opportunity. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, fear warring with a strange new emotion, determination. She'd been running her whole life, from her father's violence, from Marcus's cruelty, from the helplessness of being a woman in a world that saw her as property. But here, in this house with this man who'd sworn to protect her, something had changed. Sarah Moreland was tired of running, tired of being afraid. If Marcus wanted to take her, he was going to have to go through not just Garrett, but through her as well. Tomorrow, she'd ask Garrett to teach her to shoot. The next morning dawned clear and bright, but the tension in the house was palpable. Over breakfast, Sarah told Garrett what she'd seen. "I know," he said grimly. "Keith spotted them around midnight. They left an hour before dawn. He's planning something. Probably." Garrett set down his coffee cup. "Which is why we need to be smart about this. Sarah, I know you want to go into town and file those papers, but it might not be safe. Thorne could have men waiting in town, could ambush us on the road." Garrett ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I need to think this through." "Or," Sarah said slowly, "we don't run. We don't hide. We make him come to us on our terms." Garrett's eyes sharpened. "What are you thinking? He wants me. He won't send his men if he thinks there's a chance he couldn't get me easily." Sarah's mind was racing. What if we let him think he can? "Absolutely not." Garrett's voice was flat. "I'm not using you as bait." "You wouldn't be. I'd be volunteering." Sarah leaned forward. "Garrett, he's going to keep escalating until someone gets hurt. Better to force his hand now when we're prepared, than wait for him to choose the moment." "No." "Then teach me to shoot. Teach me to defend myself, because I'm not going to sit helplessly by while you and Pete face him alone." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Garrett swore under his breath. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Is that a yes?" "It's a we'll talk about it." He stood, then paused. "But yes to the shooting lessons. If you're staying on this ranch, you need to know how to protect yourself." An hour later, Sarah stood in the field behind the house, holding Garrett's spare revolver. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold and deadly in her hands. "First rule," Garrett said, standing behind her, his body close enough that she could feel his heat. "Never point a gun at anything you don't intend to shoot. Even unloaded, you treat every weapon with respect. All right? Second rule, shooting's not about strength. It's about steadiness and breathing." His hands came to rest on her shoulders. "You're tense. Relax." Easy for you to say, she felt rather than heard his quiet laugh. "Fair point. Okay, see those bottles on the fence?" "Yes." "That's your target. Now bring the gun up slowly. Both hands. That's it." His hands guided hers, adjusting her grip. "Look down the barrel. Line up the sights with the target. When you're ready, take a breath, let it out halfway, and squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze." Sarah did as instructed, her heart hammering. When the gun finally fired, the recoil jolted her arms, and the bullet went wide, missing all the bottles. "Again," Garrett said patiently. "You jerked the trigger. Smooth motion. Try again." They practiced for over an hour. By the end, Sarah had managed to hit 3 bottles, and her arms ached from the strain. But she also felt something else: power. For the first time in her life, she held in her hands the ability to defend herself. "You're a natural," Garrett said as they walked back to the house. "Another few days of practice, and you'll be able to hit a target at 20 paces. Will that be enough?" He stopped, turning to face her. "Sarah, I don't want it to come to that. I don't want you to have to shoot anyone." "Neither do I, but I want the choice." She met his eyes steadily. "I've spent my whole life being powerless, having choices made for me. I won't go back to that." Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then he cupped her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "You're remarkable. Do you know that?" "I'm terrified." "That's what makes you brave." He kissed her forehead. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite it." They stood like that, foreheads touching, drawing strength from each other. Then Pete's shout shattered the moment. "Riders coming! Looks like the whole damn town!" Sarah and Garrett rushed to the front of the house to find not Marcus and his hired guns, but Sheriff Davies and what looked like half the citizens of Copper Ridge. The sheriff was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense bearing. "James," the sheriff said, dismounting, "we need to talk." "John," Garrett's voice was wary. "This about Thorne?" "In a manner of speaking." Davies glanced at Sarah. "This the young lady in question?" "Hey, Miss Sarah Moreland, Sheriff John Davies." Davies tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's been a development." He pulled a paper from his pocket. "Marcus Thorne filed a complaint in town this morning. Claims you're his runaway fiancé. Claims your father signed a legal contract for the marriage. Says you stole a valuable ring and fled with intent to defraud him." Sarah's blood ran cold. "That's not true. The ring was my mother's. And the marriage, I never consented." "I believe you, ma'am." Davies's voice was gentle. "But here's the thing. Thorne's got papers. Contract signed by your father, witnessed by a judge. In the eyes of the law, it's binding." "No." Garrett stepped in front of Sarah, his body rigid. "She's employed here. She has the right to refuse. Legally, women don't have that right when it comes to contracts signed by their fathers. Not until they're 21. Davies looked genuinely apologetic. "How old are you, Miss Moreland?" 20. The word came out as a whisper. "Then I'm afraid the law's on Thorne's side." Davies held up his hand as Garrett started to speak. "Hold on. I'm not finished. The law may be on his side, but that doesn't mean I am." A murmur ran through the crowd behind him. "Thing is," Davies continued, "I've been sheriff of this county for 15 years. I know Marcus Thorne, know his reputation, know about those 2 dead wives nobody wants to talk about." His jaw set. "And I'll be damned if I deliver another woman into that snake's hands." "Then what are you saying?" Garrett's voice was taut with tension. "I'm saying there might be a way around this." Davies looked between Sarah and Garrett. "If Miss Moreland were to marry someone else before Thorne can enforce his claim, the contract with her father would be void. A woman can't be promised to one man if she's already legally wed to another." The implication hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You're suggesting—" Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm suggesting that if you and James here were to get married, say today, right now, with all these witnesses present, then Thorne's papers become worthless." Davies smiled slightly. "Just a thought." Sarah turned to Garrett, her mind reeling. "You can't." "I can't ask you to." Garrett's eyes were steady, serious, searching hers. "You're not asking. I'm offering. He took her hands. "Sarah, I know this isn't how you imagined it. Hell, it's not how I imagined it either. But if it keeps you safe from Thorn, if it gives you the protection of my name and this ranch, then I'll do it gladly." "But you loved Caroline." "I did. I'll always love her memory." His grip tightened. "But she told me to keep living, to keep hoping. And Sarah, these past weeks with you, I've felt more alive than I have in 3 years. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time. But I also know that I care about you, that I want to protect you, that the thought of Thorn touching you makes me want to commit murder." Sarah's eyes burned. "That's not love. That's maybe not yet." Garrett's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her. "But it could be, given time, given a chance." He brought her hands to his lips. "Marry me, Sarah. Not because you have to, not out of gratitude, but because you want to see where this could go. Because you believe, like I do, that maybe we could build something real together." Sarah looked at this man, this strong, gentle, broken man, who'd given her safety when she needed it most, who'd taught her to ride and shoot and hope again, who looked at her like she was precious rather than property. "If I say yes," she whispered, "will you promise me something?" "Thank you. Promise me you'll be patient, that you'll let this be real, not just a legal arrangement, that you'll give us time to fall in love?" Garrett smiled, and it transformed his face. "Sarah, I'm already halfway there." Her breath caught. "Truly?" He raised his voice, addressing the sheriff. "John, you got a reverend in that crowd?" A portly man with a kind face stepped forward. "Right here, James." "Then I guess we're having a wedding." Just a dusty ranch yard, a crowd of curious townsfolk, and a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. Reverend Fletcher kept it simple. "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to witness the union of James Garrett and Sarah Moreland. Do you, James, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." Garrett's voice was steady, sure. "And do you, Sarah, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Sarah looked into Garrett's storm-gray eyes and saw her future, saw safety and hope and the promise of something beautiful. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." Garrett cupped her face with both hands, his touch reverent. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me." Then he kissed her, sweet and slow and full of promise, while the crowd cheered. When they broke apart, Sarah found herself laughing through her tears. "We're married." "We're married," Garrett echoed, sounding equally dazed. Sheriff Davies stepped forward, handing Garrett an official-looking document. "All legal and binding. I'll file this with the county clerk today. By tomorrow, the whole territory will know Sarah Garrett is your wife." He glanced toward the ridge, including Thorn. As if summoned by his name, Marcus Thorn appeared on horseback at the edge of the property. Even from a distance, Sarah could see his fury. Garrett's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "He can't touch you now. He'll try. Let him." Garrett's voice was hard. "You're my wife now, under my protection. That means something in this territory." The crowd began to disperse, people offering congratulations and promising to spread the word. Soon it was just Sarah, Garrett, Pete, and the sheriff remaining. "I'd suggest keeping watch tonight," Davy said. "Thorn's not the type to give up easily." We'll be ready. Garrett's jaw was set. After the sheriff left, Pete coughed awkwardly. I'll just, make myself scarce. Give you two some privacy. When they were alone, Sarah turned to Garrett, suddenly unsure. What happens now? Now? Garrett touched her cheek, gently. Now we figure this out together. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we're both comfortable with. He paused. Sarah, this marriage may have started out of necessity, but I meant what I said. I want this to be real. Want us to be real. I do too. Sarah leaned into his touch. But I need time. Need to know that I won't hurt you. His eyes darkened with understanding. You have all the time you need. We'll go as slow as you want. Thank you. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly. For everything. That night, Sarah stayed in her own room, with the door locked, as always. But this time, she fell asleep with a smile on her face and a ring on her finger. Garrett's mother's wedding band, simple silver, that somehow meant more than all the gold in the world. She was Sarah Garrett now. Wife, partner, someone with choices and rights and a future worth fighting for. And if Marcus Thorne thought he could take that away, he had another thing coming. The attack came 3 nights later. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming. She bolted from bed, rushed to the window, and her heart stopped. The barn was on fire, flames licking up the walls like hungry demons. She threw on her robe and ran downstairs to find Garrett already gone, Pete's shouts echoing from outside. Through the window, she saw them trying to free the terrified horses while the fire spread. Then she saw the riders, 6 men on horseback, circling the property like wolves. Even in the firelight, she recognized Marcus at their head. This was his revenge. If he couldn't have her, he'd destroy everything Garrett owned. Sarah's hand moved to the revolver Garrett had given her to keep by her bed. She checked the chambers, fully loaded. Her heart hammered as she moved to the door, then stopped. Going out there was exactly what Marcus wanted. He'd separate her from Garrett, take her while the men were distracted fighting the fire. Unless she could distract him first. Sarah returned upstairs and grabbed the emergency horn Garrett kept for summoning help from neighboring ranches. She moved to the window, aimed, and blew 3 sharp blasts, the signal for danger. The riders turned toward the house. Sarah saw Marcus spur his horse forward, his face twisted with rage. Perfect. She opened the window and raised the revolver, hands steady despite her racing pulse. That's far enough, Marcus. He reined in his horse 20 feet from the house. In the firelight, his face was a mask of fury. Sarah, come down here. This doesn't have to get ugly. You're burning down my husband's ranch. I'd say it's already ugly. Your husband, Marcus spat the words. That sham marriage isn't legal. Your father's contract supersedes. The sheriff says otherwise. Sarah kept the gun trained on him. I'm legally married, Marcus. You have no claim on me. You think that changes anything? He dismounted, taking a step toward the house. You're mine, Sarah. You were promised to me. I've spent good money on you. I'm not a commodity to be bought and sold. You're whatever I say you are. Another step. Now put down that gun before you hurt yourself. Sarah fired. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of Marcus, making him jump back. His men reached for their weapons. The next one goes through your knee, Sarah said coldly. Tell your men to stand down. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Something had shifted in Sarah. Fear had burned away in the fire of her anger, leaving behind steel. You took everything from me, Marcus. my freedom, my dignity, my sense of safety. You made me run like an animal. So yes, I would absolutely dare. Behind Marcus, she saw Garrett moving through the shadows, Pete flanking from the other side. They'd gotten the horses out and were now positioning themselves. "You're making a mistake," Marcus snarled. "I'll have this ranch. I'll have you, one way or another." "No." Garrett's voice cut through the night like a blade. He stepped into the light, rifle aimed at Marcus's back. "You won't." Marcus whirled. "Garrett, finally decided to join us? Get off my property." "I don't think so." Marcus gestured to his men. "See, I've got 6 guns to your 2. Not great odds for you." "Actually, it's 3. Old Pete emerged from the barn, shotgun leveled, and I'd think real careful before making any moves, Thorn. This scattergun don't require much aim. In the distance, Sarah heard the thunder of approaching horses, the neighboring ranchers responding to her horn blast. Within minutes, a dozen armed men surrounded Marcus and his hired guns. "Now," Garrett said quietly, "you were saying something about odds?" Marcus's face contorted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Sheriff Davies rode into the light, his badge glinting. "Marcus Thorn, you're under arrest for arson, attempted kidnapping, and trespassing with intent to harm. You can't prove. Got about 15 witnesses who just watched you burn down a barn and threaten a woman." Davies dismounted, pulling out iron shackles. "Turns out, some of these fine folks also have information about those 2 dead wives of yours. We're going to have a long talk about that." As Marcus was led away in chains, still shouting threats and protests, Sarah lowered the gun with shaking hands. The adrenaline that had kept her upright suddenly drained away, and she sank to the floor. Garrett was at her side in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "Sarah, God, Sarah, you could have been killed." "So could you." She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the smell of smoke and horse and him. "The barn can be rebuilt. You can't be." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes fierce. "Don't ever put yourself in danger like that again." "I had to." "He would have taken me while you were distracted. Then I would have gotten you back." His hands framed her face. "Sarah, you're worth more than this entire ranch, more than anything I own. Do you understand that?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. Not for me, for you." I know, sweetheart." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "But we're safe now. He's gone. It's over." Sarah clung to him, letting herself finally break down. All the fear, all the tension of the past weeks poured out in great, heaving sobs. And Garrett held her through it all, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. I promise you're safe." Later, after the neighbors had left and Pete had bedded down the horses in the corral, Garrett and Sarah sat on the porch, watching the last embers of the barn smolder. The fire had been contained before it could spread to other buildings, but the barn itself was a total loss. "We'll rebuild," Garrett said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Better than before." "I'm sorry." Sarah's voice was small. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, then I'd still be half dead inside." Garrett turned her to face him. "Sarah, you brought me back to life. Yes, Thorn burning the barn is a blow. But having you here, having a reason to hope again, that's worth a dozen barns." "You mean that?" Every word. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "These past weeks with you have been the best I've had since Caroline died. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You make me want to be better. I feel the same way. Sarah touched his face, tracing the scar she'd come to love. You've given me so much. Safety, respect, a home, a future. We've given each other that. Garrett's voice dropped lower. Sarah, I know we agreed to take things slow, but tonight, when I thought I might lose you, I realized something. What? I'm in love with you. The words came out raw, honest. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first day in town when you tried to sell your ring for bread. Maybe when you stitched my head without hesitation. Maybe tonight when you faced down Thorn with a gun and more courage than anyone I've ever met. But somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you. Sarah's breath caught. Garrett, you don't have to say it back. I know it might be too soon for you. I just needed you to know, needed you to understand that this isn't just necessity anymore. It's real for me. You're real for me. Sarah stared into his eyes, these storm gray eyes that had seen so much pain, but still held so much hope. And in that moment, she knew her own truth. I love you too, she whispered. I've been falling for you since you told me gold wasn't what was needed here. Since you gave me safety and respect and choices. Since you taught me to ride and shoot and believe in myself again. She smiled through her tears. I love you, James Garrett, not as my savior or protector, but as my partner, my equal, my husband. Garrett's expression transformed into something beautiful. Joy, relief, love so intense it took her breath away. Say that again. I love you. No, the other part. Sarah laughed. My husband. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. This kiss was different from their others. Deeper, more passionate, full of promises and possibilities. Sarah melted into him, her hands sliding into his hair, her body pressed against his solid warmth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. Come to bed with me, not because you have to, not out of obligation, but because you want to. Because you love me and I love you, and we're married in every way except one, Sarah finished softly. Her heart raced, but not with fear. With anticipation, with trust. Yes, take me to bed, husband. Garrett stood, scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Sarah laughed, throwing her arms around his neck as he carried her inside and up the stairs. He paused outside his bedroom door. Last chance to change your mind. We can still go slow. Sarah silenced him with a kiss. I don't want slow. I want you, all of you, now. He carried her across the threshold and kicked the door closed behind them. That night, in the big bed that had been empty for so long, James and Sarah Garrett finally became husband and wife in truth. And if there were moments when Sarah tensed, when old fears threatened to surface, Garrett was endlessly patient, endlessly gentle. You're safe, he whispered against her skin. I've got you. We go at your pace. I trust you, Sarah breathed. Show me what love should feel like. And he did. The weeks that followed were a blur of rebuilding, both the barn and their life together. Neighbors came to help raise the new structure, better and stronger than before. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch a true home, planting a garden, mending clothes, cooking meals that had the men fighting for seconds. But more than that, she and Garrett built their marriage. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. They worked side by side during the day, finding rhythms and routines that felt natural. They made love with increasing passion and confidence, Sarah shedding her old fears layer by layer. "You're beautiful," Garrett whispered to her one night, holding her close. The words carried weight, a promise of the future they would build together. Garrett would whisper, tracing the curves of her body like she was precious art. "So damn beautiful." "I never felt beautiful before you," Sarah would reply, marveling at the way he looked at her, like she was his entire world. 2 months after the fire, Sheriff Davies rode out to deliver news. Marcus Thorne's going to hang. Jury found him guilty of murdering his second wife. Evidence was overwhelming once people started talking. Sarah felt no satisfaction in the news, only relief. "It's really over?" "It's over." Davies tipped his hat. "You can stop looking over your shoulder, Mrs. Garrett. You're free." Free. The words settled into Sarah's bones like sunshine. For the first time in her life, she was truly, completely free. That night, she and Garrett sat on their porch. They always thought of it as their porch now, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Happy?" Garrett asked, his arm around her shoulders. Deliriously. Sarah tilted her head to look at him. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "I came here with nothing. No hope, no future, no idea how I'd survive." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "And now I have everything. A home, a husband who loves me, a life I never dreamed possible." "You gave me the same thing," Garrett said softly. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." "We taught each other," Sarah smiled. "That's what partners do." Speaking of which, Garrett's expression turned slightly nervous. "I've been thinking about something." "Oh?" "The house has 4 bedrooms. Seems like a waste for just the 2 of us." Sarah's breath caught. "Garrett, are you saying—" "I'm saying maybe it's time to think about filling those rooms. If you want. No pressure. But something." He placed his hand over her stomach, his touch gentle and reverent. "I'd like a family with you, Sarah. Children who grow up knowing love instead of fear, who learn that strength and gentleness can coexist." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I want that too. So much." "Yeah?" His face lit up like sunrise. "Yeah." She kissed him, pouring all her love into it. "Let's build a family, James Garrett. Let's fill this house with life and love and laughter. Starting tonight?" He waggled his eyebrows suggestively. Sarah laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Starting tonight." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the nursery, the room that had been meant for Garrett and Caroline's child, cradling her own daughter. Emma Caroline Garrett had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn spirit, and she was absolutely perfect. Garrett stood beside them, his arm around Sarah's waist, his expression one of awed wonder. "She's beautiful, just like her mother. She has your eyes. Poor thing." But Garrett's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Sarah. For this, for her, for everything." Sarah leaned into her husband, feeling his strength and love surround her like a protective shield. Outside, the sun set over Broken Creek Ranch, painting everything in shades of gold. The new barn stood strong and proud. The garden flourished with vegetables and flowers. Horses grazed peacefully in the fields. And inside the ranch house, A family built on love, trust, and second chances began their next chapter together. Sarah Moreland had come to Montana with nothing but fear and desperation. Sarah Garrett stood here now with everything: a husband who cherished her, a daughter who would never know her mother's early sorrows, and a future bright with possibility. She'd learned that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest dawns, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to fight despite it, that love, real love, isn't about possession or control, but about partnership and respect. And she'd learned that even broken things, broken creeks, broken hearts, broken spirits, can be mended into something stronger and more beautiful than they ever were before. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Garrett's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.